As we begin painting our project, you need to make sure that you have not only your brush, your project, but water and the watercolor. It's important that you understand that watercolor means water before you color. You have to wet down this paint because it's a concentrated paint. So I'm going to add a little bit of water, not a lot, to the well, mix it in before I start painting. Now my watercolor paint is fluid and able to be painted. You're going to notice how I start painting in, and I'm going to fill in some areas as I am working. I'm being nice and careful to keep my water from running around and moving in directions I don't want it to. If I put too much water on my brush, it's going to start flowing into areas I didn't anticipate. So I'm going to work slowly to get the feel for the paint. While paint is wet, I am able to actually take multiple colors and blend them together. Any areas that are wet and are touching will automatically kind of blend, and you're going to notice that as I do this with a separate color. Also, you will notice that the less water I use, the darker the pigment of the color I chose. The more water that I add, the lighter the area will become. You're now going to see me very quickly go through and complete this area. I'm taking time to make sure I stay with my color scheme. But one thing that is important to note is that this ink that we printed with will run a little bit from the water. So I'm being very careful not to go over it because it will become messy looking if I'm not. Another important thing to take into consideration is if I told you that two areas that are wet will blend together, that also means I have to be careful about when I'm working on the background versus the foreground. In this case, I worked on my orange background and I waited and let it dry before I added in the blue of the ducks. So I might go work on another area while I'm waiting for it to do that, so I'm not just sitting around watching paint to dry. The trickiest area of your painting is going to be your monochromatic scheme, because in this one you need to be working to control the amount of water that is mixed in with your watercolor in order to control the intensity or value of the color as you place it down on your paper. Remember, the less water that you have, the darker it will be, but it can't be thick paint. If you are scooping the paint out of your container, you're not doing it correctly. If you add more water, it becomes lighter. In our paint palettes, there is technically a white and a black. I don't want to depend on these to get my value to be light. I still want to have to work and experiment with controlling my value by the amount of water that I use. But I am going to use these to help me emphasize it a little bit because I am going to need a little help.